Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been a great event so far. This session is on carbon to value. My name is, again, Anthony Vicari. I'm a consultant at Cleantech Group. So Cleantech is a research consulting and global events company. We focus on clean tech and climate tech. Our research team puts out about 30 reports a year on all different topics and maintains a global database of innovators. Our events bring together innovators, corporations, investors, governments, and other stakeholders throughout the clean tech ecosystem to work together to solve and implement decarbonization and other climate challenges. My own work on the consulting team derives from my background in material science, so it tends to focus more on chemicals, materials, and deep tech projects. And I'll let the rest of the panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Kate.
Great, thanks, Anthony. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to represent LanzaTech. My name is Kate Walsh. I'm the head of investor relations and tax for LanzaTech, and I also oversee all external communications. My career is in oil and gas and renewable energy, so lots of experience with topics that we're going to be discussing this afternoon. And at its core, LanzaTech is a carbon recycling company, and we'll get into that in more detail later.
Hey folks, my name is Christina. I'm Boston-based and I'm at Lowercarbon Capital. We are we're an early stage venture capital firm with $2 billion under management. And my background's as a chemist. I also spent time at ARPA-E and led a green steel venture back in the day. Great to meet you guys.
Yeah, last one in a row. My name is Tim Boeltken. I'm a chemical engineer from background, but more importantly, I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of INERATEC. INERATEC is an e-fuel producing company, maybe as you can hear from my accent, based in Germany. Karlsruhe, we're a spin-off from the local university, Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, but become over the past 10 years already one of the leading e-fuel producers globally, focusing on decarbonizing aviation, maritime, heavy-duty road transportation, and all the sectors which are hard to abate.
Thanks. So before we get into specific questions, I just would like to start with a quick level set. I'm sure you're all familiar with what carbon to value means, but really it's a wide range of technologies under an umbrella term for taking captured carbon from a wide range of sources, whether it's atmospheric, oceanic, biogenic, industrial, or otherwise, and using it to make carbon-containing outputs. So fuels, of course, various chemicals, even minerals and materials. So hundreds of companies operating in this space. We have a great cross-section here today of people involved in some of the more important aspects of it and larger potential volume aspects of it that we'll be happy to get into. I'd like to start just by having especially Kate and Tim talk about what your specific company's solutions are.
Sure. I'll go first, and then Tim, you can follow up. So LanzaTech, as I mentioned, at its heart is a carbon recycling company. We have three main lines of business. We have our biorefining segment, which is our largest and most important. And we have acting today 6 commercial scale bioreactors at 6 of our customers globally. And what we do is we take waste CO2 and put it through our biorefining infrastructure and produce ethanol. There is a co-product that we produce along with ethanol. So for every 11 tons of what we produce, 10 tons is ethanol and 1 ton is a nutrient-rich protein. And so we recently launched a new line of business outside of those core 3 that I mentioned, which is nutritional protein. And it's in nascent stages of being tested in human nutrition, pet food, and is in aquaculture feed programs right now. So the biorefining is our core. We sell our biorefining technology, and we have consulting and engineering and consumables to support those biorefineries. And we sell those to customers, and the base of our business is licensing. And so we generate licensing revenue from those bioreactors that are in operations today. And what we are doing is we're managing a very large biorefining funnel of projects where we advance projects through the various stages, ultimately through to construction, commissioning, and operations. And LanzaTech generates revenue along each of those stages. But the end goal is to deploy more biorefining licenses globally in order to have that high margin revenue support our base business. And so with biorefining being at the core of what we do, We also support that with joint development and research projects. So there's a fair amount of research that is going on. And we have a myriad of clients that work with us. They can be government funded with the DOE and the Department of Defense, or other commercial operators that want to do different projects and analysis, varying in different geographies. And then our last core of the three, so we've got biorefining, these joint development research projects, and then we have a line called Carbon Smart, and that's where we sell the ethanol coming out of the tailpipe of our biorefineries. So our customers own some of the volumes that they're producing, but then we also take title, and those have a number of end markets, including transportation fuel. So the ethanol is transportation grade and can be blended into on-road fuels. We also sell to plastic companies. We have a project ongoing with IKEA right now, and then we also sell to textiles. We have lines of clothing that use our Carbon Smart yarn that's made from steel emissions. And it's in Lululemon and On and REI and Craig Hoppers. So you can find various product lines out there that use that ethanol that's coming from the biorefineries that take waste CO2 and convert it to a valuable product like ethanol. And then in addition to those three lines of business, plus the nutritional protein that I mentioned, LanzaTech also is the largest shareholder in a company called LanzaJet, which ties into what Tim will talk about in terms of sustainable aviation fuel. LanzaJet is the world's first commercial scale alcohol to jet producer, and LanzaJet should be announcing the production of its first barrels of SAF imminently. So we're just waiting for that announcement. So they're completing the commissioning. They were a bit delayed with Hurricane Helene, and so we were expecting to have first barrels prior to this, but any day now. And so we're excited to see LanzaJet produce those first barrels. And LanzaJet also is in the licensing business, and we have a joint offering with LanzaJet called Circulaire that takes the waste CO2 through to ethanol. That's our part of the business, and then LanzaJet takes the ethanol and converts it to sustainable aviation fuel. So I'll turn it over to Tim.
Okay, hopefully I can describe it so eloquently as you did. So basically INERATEC is basically same, but also completely different than what you guys are doing. So first at its core, we are a tech company. So we have developed and we are building very compact synthesis modules that can convert, in this case, CO2 and hydrogen into synthetic fuels. In its core, it's a thermochemical process pathway. So we use Fischer-Tropsch synthesis, methanol synthesis in the thermochemical process pathway to then produce drop-in ready fuels that can replace today's applications for the fossil fuels. And this also said, we have two business models. We are not in licensing yet, but as a tech company, we are building and selling our technology, our modules, which are de-risk, which are in different categories already. So we're in the megawatt scale. We are currently building our 10 megawatt product, and we are selling this to our customers, majorly pioneering customers from oil and gas industry, but also from the Cleantech space. And here we are deploying our solutions. We are getting uptime, and we are actually delivering these units, and the customers are producing the fuels. And then we are starting the second business model. Just now we heard a lot about FOAC financing and project development of the first plants. We are, as we are speaking, finalizing the commissioning of our first 10 megawatt product. It's in Frankfurt, Germany. It's a brownfield close to a chemical park where we are utilizing green hydrogen as a byproduct from chloroalkaline production and CO2 which is captured from a biogas plant. And here we are testing our build, own and operate business model. It means we are investing in our tech. We are producing here for the first time sustainable aviation fuel, diesel for road transportation, but also chemical feedstock for naphtha, for waxes, for the food industry. So various customer base. And in this business models, we are the first time also selling the fuel to our end customers.
And just so that we can clarify for everyone here, what does a 10 megawatt plant for your process translate to in terms of amount of fuel, things like that?
Very good point. So our technology is defined in product. So we have a 1 megawatt, a 10 megawatt product, and we are working on a 100 megawatt product. The terms 1, 10, and 100 megawatt is actually, as we are in very deep conversations always with the energy sector, and it correlates to the electrolyzer scale. So a 1 megawatt product of ours fits perfectly to a 1 megawatt electrolyzer and is producing approximately 0.1 million US gallons per year. A 10 megawatt product is then correlating to a 10 megawatt electrolyzer and producing approximately 1 million US gallons a year, and the 100 megawatt and the 10 million US gallons per year. And that's also very important to understand how our modular technology works. So we are actually looking at the upstream technology. Everything in the renewable space is modular. So we talk about PV modules, we talk about wind turbines, we talk about battery modules, electrolyzers, which are modular, direct air capture is modular. But then we think about a chemical refinery or a chemical synthesis unit like a big billion-dollar refinery. So, and this is something what we are changing here in the step change. We have these modules and they can be deployed according to the availability of the entire upstream technology. And by that we can scale, by that we can deploy our modules, we can produce the fuels, we can make the revenues and scale while also the upstream value chain is scaling as such.
Excellent. And Kate, can you give us a sense of what scale you're currently operating at as well?
Sure. So on the biorefinery size of our plants, we have 6 commercial operating plants today. They vary in size, but the average is about 60,000 tons of production of ethanol per year. In our biorefining funnel, we have over 100 different opportunities, and the average size for those in the funnel is around 80,000 tons a year.
So one of the questions I often get is, out of all the different uses of carbon and all the different molecules you could convert it to, especially when you make something as widely useful as ethanol or methanol, how do you decide what pathways to explore and to go down? What have you gotten the most interest in? Where are you seeing interest from the market, from customers, things like that?
Sure, I can start. So for biorefining, we see the most interest coming from heavy industrial-based customers. So oil refineries, steel mills, ferroalloy plants, those big existing plants today that have a ton of industrial off-gases with no value being created today. And so our technology harnesses those off-gases, puts them through this bioreactor that uses a microbe that can consume that waste CO2 and turn it into ethanol. And then there's a profit motive at the end of that where the ethanol is widely used and there's markets globally so that our customers can then sell the ethanol into existing markets fairly easily. And so when our customers come to us and they want to look at a project, they want to do what's right for the environment, absolutely, and meet their countries and their companies' net zero goals, but they also see a lot of value because there's a profit motive with what we do. And we're changing the conversation about our biorefineries as to how much do these refineries cost and change the tone, and it's how much profit can I make from installing these biorefineries and the equipment that goes along with it. And so it's nice to see that conversation change. Our customers that have adopted the technology today understood that from the beginning, that this is the right thing to do, but also we can make money from it, and so we should do it, and we should do it now. And we are seeing more and more adopt that philosophy of we can turn pollution into profit, we can make trash into treasure, and let's start exploring what that looks like.
We took a bit different approach. So in our core technology, it's a kind of platform technology. So we couldn't decide if we go the methanol pathway or rather the Fischer-Tropsch pathway to make the paraffinic fuels. And so actually we let the customers decide. And we saw there's a huge demand for green methanol, that's clear. But especially when you look at the early adopters, the entire customer pool we had came from Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. You can already today produce ASTM compliant sustainable aviation fuel, no need for new certifications. You can produce straight run diesel, which you can use in existing car fleets. And actually in case also the crude you are producing, you can like open up the entire value chain where you use crude oil for today. And so this is where the company INERATEC is currently really focused on, bringing the first projects live, focusing on Fischer-Tropsch synthesis. And we think that the methanol pathway will follow up in a quite, let's say, later time for that.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, of course.
Maybe I'll jump in.
I'd like you to.
Yeah, what we're seeing broadly in terms of customer interest downstream for carbon to value products. So I'll say Lowercarbon has invested in several carbon to value startups. Probably I'll talk about a few of them today. For example, in fuels, we're invested in 12 and Air Company. In chemicals, we're invested in Solugen and Dioxycle. So we'll pull on some of those threads, but maybe one I'll give as an example here in this question is Air Company. They're an e-fuel producer and have found a lot of traction with the Department of Defense, because beyond trying to sell a customer or a feedstock provider, in the case that you were providing, Kate, on this is good for your bottom line, which I mean, I think that's what we're all going for, or this is the right thing to do. How about this solves a big operational problem that you have? All of these things end up hitting the bottom line in some way or another. But I'll highlight the Department of Defense because Air Company is providing a solution that nobody else has been able to provide. So in contested environments, it can be hard to get fuel, and often lives are lost because getting in fuel can be so tricky. So the idea of providing CO2 and water, which you can basically get anywhere, and turning that into fully formulated sustainable aviation fuel. So it has all 4 molecules. You mentioned paraffins, all 4 molecules that you need in order to make a jet go. That's something that only Air Company has been able to do, and that's why they've gotten so much traction with the DoD, because you don't need to mix in other fossil-derived blends. You can actually make fully formulated SAF at the point of use. So it was really interesting to see a customer that had like deep logistical complexity find a carbon to value solution.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I have come across other SAF companies, and I'm curious, your perspective is how much of a barrier is that actually to the complexity of the output? Are the processes adaptable enough to make that less unique in the future? Will it be more abundant, or is that a defensible moat? I guess I'm curious about. I'm asking all of you. I mean,
blending happens at pretty much every airport. Yeah. So for the foreseeable future, I don't see SAF companies that are making 1 or 2 of these molecules having any trouble blending in.
Fair enough. So, okay. So given all of that, I guess we've talked about who some of the customers are, what some of the markets these molecules are going into. My next question would be, what makes one of these technologies more interesting to an investor? Obviously, we'll start with you, Christina.
Well, I love that you picked up on modularity, Tim, because that's one of the things that I think of. It's a pretty rough market out there right now, as we all are aware, and the ability to scale the size of the plant and the level of ambition with feedback from markets, feedback from capital markets, has been hugely helpful to our companies that are providing a technology that's modular. So that's one thing. IP differentiation is always important because you have to answer the question, hey, what if someone comes up behind you? Like, forget your competitive matrix where you're better than everybody else on certain metrics that you've cherry-picked. Ideally, these are really important metrics, but what if someone else comes up behind you that has even a really similar solution, but they can get more capital? So how do you stay competitive and stay differentiated? So that continuing ability to expand the IP portfolio in the right direction is pretty crucial.
So I mean, adding in here, I think there are four actually big drivers of adoption. I mean, the first is how do you get to a product? How do you get to a point where you can sell something. So it's this technology readiness level. So to get from the point where you're not develop anymore, where you are not in parts of still in the process of financing your first of a kind product, I think that's absolutely key. And I mean, INERATEC so far has sold over 16 plants to the customers. Deploying now, I mean, we took the investment decision on our, let's say, first commercial unit already in 2022. So being operational end of this year, beginning of next year, and then getting also the first products out. I think that's the first key, because this is then also unlocking the next phases of getting access to capital, where we are not talking about only venture capital, but also Series C, project finance, and so on. The other point is the economic opportunities that you see. So we talked about trash to value. I mean, yes, there's a lot of discussions about SAF. We also saw it from the recent offtake contracts, which also some of your portfolios probably have taken. But at the end, it's not only about tapping only on a huge market like SAF, where you see, okay, there are certain green premiums you can score, but also in the first phases, getting the customers who are paying, let's say, very good prices to have access to the product, and maybe also with that decarbonizing their product. So what we have, for instance, here in Stowe, we have now signed a contract with a US-based company in the food sector. And that's actually a very interesting space, because here the material or the product is not making that much of their capex and opex of their operational expenditures, like compared to an airline, for instance. So getting these things is certainly one driver for adoption. Then what we've also seen is that now with the next COP starting again, so we see more and more that also the corporates that are having a higher willingness to pay, that are actually having clear goals to decarbonize their sectors, their Scope 3 emissions. That's certainly another driver. And last but not least, it's the regulatory tailwinds that have been there, that are still there, that are very strong in Europe, that are strong in the US. And what we are now seeing with looking to areas like Japan, for instance, these regulations will come up more and more over the next decade to come. And I think that's actually driving us to deploy our technologies globally very fast.
And along those lines, we were talking about the regulatory tailwinds. One of the things that our speaker from Bloomberg earlier today mentioned was the mix of mandates and incentives in different parts of the world, and how those have different impacts at different parts of a technology's life cycle. You know, I've had conversations with innovators talking about how they're producing fuels in the Gulf region for logistical purposes, and then selling it in California to European airlines in order to stack mandates and incentives. And I'm curious how you see this evolving, how you see this affecting the space today and in the future, this kind of thing.
Yeah, I can kick off from LanzaTech's perspective. We think that the regulations and the carrots and the sticks offered are in their nascent stages, and there's a lot more growth that can happen across the board on that front. From LanzaTech's perspective, we feel that our biggest competition is the do-nothing approach. There just isn't enough incentives for companies to take on these first-of-a-kind projects, or ones that have compelling economics in the future, but may not have the right unit economics for them today. And so we definitely support further regulation and incentives to help early adopters get over the hurdle of capital costs being that gating item, and so that we can get more of these projects deployed and get the unit economics to be more compelling.
I love this framing, the enemy is the do-nothing approach. I mean, yes, we look at all the incentives and regulations, and we even have a head of regulation who's every day summarizing me all the new regulations coming in place on a global scale. But we never waited for that. So we consider ourselves as pioneers, and that's the entire structure of our company. This is where we get the motivation from our talents, from our staff. So it's not about doing something because now finally, after 10 years of negotiations, the regulation is there. But we want to do what's right. And I think that's also how we got in the position position to get the technology deployed, get the technology de-risked, and not wait it until some regulation is there. Sure, it helps. Clear policy is always good. Europe is maybe not so good in providing clear policy, but everybody is looking at it. But let's hope that in the next years this will become clearer and better, and then you get actually even more tailwinds on that. Yeah.
And have you seen anything in your own portfolio companies that's related to policy? What tends to accelerate development or not?
I mean, here's a good example. So Solugen is a company that makes chemicals from biomass using enzymes, not too dissimilar in some ways to LanzaTech. They're selling to oil and gas companies and companies that just need these chemicals, whether it's hydrogen peroxide or glucaric acid. These are specialty chemicals that are just demanded by the big industrials. And they recently benefited from the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office. So they just inked a $213 million, I know that's a pretty big loan, deal with the DOE for their second bioforge. So that'll be over 10,000 tons per year, I'm pretty sure. At least their first one was 10,000 tons per year. So this is bioforge number 2. It'll be in Marshall, Minnesota, and located right next to a processing facility that'll give them the corn dextrose they need to as the feedstock for their equipment. So in this case, the DOE was really excited to see a transformational technology. They have like 500,000x'd their performance of their enzymes in the 6 years that they've been around using a variety of computational approaches. It's basically directed evolution. And yeah, it's just a cool made in America story. And this is the largest single investment that the U.S. Department that the U.S. has ever made in a biomanufacturing capacity. So pretty excited to see some of the tailwinds that are coming from here in the U.S.
And with everything you've all seen, what do you think would be the things that would have the greatest effect in accelerating further deployment and development of this technology space?
I can speak from the LanzaTech side in that when we evaluate all the different systems out there that are used to incentivize carbon recycling and climate solutions, we would say the carrot approach is more effective for our customers than the stick. And so we would applaud more of the carrot approach rather than the stick approach.
Because the stick approach is being contested, presumably.
And I think it's tough to incentivize getting those projects up and off the ground. If you take a look at the stick, I would say the EU ETS is a good example. And while that's, I think, very positive to start different types of behavior in certain pathways, it's not really benefiting us because there's other issues that come into play from a European Union regulation standpoint that are causing hindrances. So I think if you put a stick in, then you're adding more sticks to the pile, and then it's just tougher to get projects off the ground. Well, if you give a carrot, then companies will find a way, and they'll take advantage of those tax credits or the grants or whatever that may be out there to get the project off the ground.
Personally don't know if it's carrots or sticks, what's better. At the end, it's like a clear policy so that you are sure that that's the policy where you can stick for the next 5 to 10 years and not like any review clause 3 years later. And in these next 3 years, nothing gonna change. But besides this clear policy, I think it's also the access to funding, access to capital, be it like equity, be it debt financing, even in the earlier stages. So for our Frankfurt plant, even it's like a first of its kind plant, we secured over 30% of debt financing, which is, I think, quite unique in this space. But if you see this, especially now with the eye on what's happening in China. So we have one of the colleagues, they just came back from China and looked at the entire electrolyzer technology. And there's the saying in the electrolyzer business, especially in Europe, is that as soon as you can spell the word electrolyzer right there, you get access to funding, you get access to capital. And I would say that's certainly something what needs to be looked out, especially for tech companies that are developing the company and developing the tech. So once you have access to these fundings, you can quicker deploy, you can quicker test, and that's one game changer.
And one thing that I think it's important to highlight is just the potential scale of the opportunity here. There are so many different chemicals and molecules and fuels that are needed in the world, totaling in the many, many billions of gallons per year. How much of that do you think will ultimately be captured by these kinds of carbon to value technologies, and what would it take to get there?
I mean, that's a great question. From my seat, if you take a look at LanzaTech, and it's a tiny company, you know, the market cap around 300 million. But if you start from one end of the spectrum with our biorefining platform and go to the other and take a look at all that we can do, we can access a total addressable market for each of our products in excess of 2 trillion. So there's no way that LanzaTech will ever even take a meaningful slice out of that, but even just a minuscule slice.
Kate.
Oh, yeah. That's right. That's right. Talk to me in 100 years. But even just a minuscule slice would be a game-changing, life changer for us. And so it just sets us up for decades and decades of growth to come, because the TAM is so huge and the opportunities are so ubiquitous. So I think that that's what gets us going in the morning, is that there's so many exciting projects out there, and there's so much to do and so much ground to cover, and that's our vision, is to be a meaningful player in the circular carbon economy, and that can come across many of these huge markets that have a ton of value to be mined from waste carbon.
I mean, as soon as you have to have a total addressable market of trillions, I think you cannot calculate it. And I mean, I was also contesting the Bloomberg presentation today, because at the end you do not know in which way it goes. Nobody knows that. Nobody has a magic like glass bulb where you can say, okay, that's going to be the hydrogen prices in 10 years or 15 years. I mean, what's pretty clear is we will electrify everything what can be directly electrified. For hard-to-abate sectors, we will continue to use liquid fuels in the future. I'm from Germany, so I'm not the biggest fan of nuclear power, so there's maybe a tradition to that. But I also doubt that nuclear reactors will provide you renewable electrons in the future at cost. And so, I mean, it's going to be a massive market anyway. And then you made one important point. It's actually a defense sector. I think the Russian war in Ukraine changed everything, even in the more pacifistic states like Germany, that the defense sector, which is even in peace times, the cause for over 5% of greenhouse gas emission. That's only in peace times, right? And we talk about logistics. We talk about, okay, what happens if, where do you get your feedstock from? And it will not be electrons. It will be a liquid fuel which can be stored, which can be used across all sectors. And that's a tremendous market. So happy to be part of it and capturing most of the market on this.
Well, I mean, I kind of have my capitalist hat on while I'm up here. So, you know, in response to all of this, I think about the concept of shutdown parity, when the OpEx of continuing to run a fossil version of that produces some carbon-containing molecule is equal to the CapEx plus OpEx of your new greenfield thing. And that's pretty hard to meet, but if it does, then politics and soft power aside, which is a big aside, but putting that aside for a second, you would have really no incentive but to switch. And so as an early stage investor, we think about the opportunities to really change those fundamental unit economics. Now, right, across the unit economic stack, what you've probably got energy needed for transformation, unless your carbon molecule is already significantly reduced. You have a lot of hydrogen in there, so in which case the energy is kind of free and it comes within the molecule. But energy, feedstock, levelized CapEx, and then everything else, other OpEx. And so, yes, many of these things have really similar drivers, but where you can arbitrage the biggest pieces, like really cheap feedstock, will work in some places, and really cheap energy will work in some places. And so, for me, one of the biggest barriers to sustainable versions of carbon companies taking over a larger section of the TAM is grid interconnect. Like, renewables are just cheaper. than fossil ways to make electricity, but it's slow to get on the grid for a variety of reasons, and I appreciate that we're going to need baseload power. So there'll be some leveling with respect to what clean power costs or prices look like. But I always go back to the fundamental unit economics, and there is a tipping right now that we're seeing as what came for the electricity sector with respect to renewables is now coming for every sector of the economy, because as we see with industrial revolutions, when you change obviously the dominant and cheapest form of energy, that ripples through every industry. So it's the green swath is definitely coming for these sectors.
Do you think that will change the geography of where we do a lot of our industrial manufacturing and things like that?
Yeah, it seems really possible. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes and no. I mean, at the end, once you are able to convert dispatched renewable electricity in like a transportable fuel, there's no need for that, because there's infrastructure available. You can transport it all around, and you can transport an energy carrier with a very, very high energy density around the world. So I would say necessarily it doesn't need to change, but the barrier, and also I would say one of the chances you have, is to understand how to develop these projects. I mean, it's capex heavy. Opex is absolutely the key for getting the production costs down, and being in the position to understand where to deploy these projects, how to deploy these projects, with whom to deploy these projects, and then get reliability up. I think that's absolutely key for breaking the barriers.
Excellent, thank you. If you guys have anything else to add, let me know. Otherwise, I'll open it up to questions.
We could keep talking all day, Anthony,
I
so
know.
we better let them.
I know.
Thank you. I think I have a question for Kate. I'm a student of the last Cleantech cycle, and I think LanzaTech is a company that hailed from New Zealand, come to the US. Maybe you piloted first in China, you pivot to like from ethanol to SAF. Is there any valuable lessons that you can share of, how to make this incredible technologies go to scale and continue to thrive? Because a lot of time this doesn't happen. Most companies just die.
Yeah, no, great question. So yeah, LanzaTech first started in New Zealand 19 years ago. So I think that's one of the strengths of the company, is that it's not new. The company has spent 19 years developing the platform, the biorefining platform, and the microbes that are used today. And so we've made it through the valley of death, and LanzaTech is pre-profit but not pre-revenue. And so how do we get to profit is we have to deploy more of our bioreactors or biorefining equipment globally. And you're right, we started in China. That wasn't our first project, but it ended up being the first several bioreactors that were put in place. China moved very quickly. China tends to have a much lower cost to construction, but I think they moved very swiftly because they saw the value of using the off gases and making a profitable product out of it. And so we've got 4 plants in China now, and that was because the ethanol that was produced had such value that they could get more money out of their operations. And so they had a very, very dominant profit motive, which I think is great. And so it's taken our other 2 plants a little longer to get up. We have one in Ghent, Belgium with ArcelorMittal, and our 6th plant is in India with India Oil. I think India will move very fast as well. So I think what our strategy is threefold. It's to take our existing customers and build out with them, to have them be repeat customers, and we see a line of growth there. It's also to take a look globally at what jurisdictions can move faster than others and put more of our commercial effort in those areas. We've highlighted India as being one of the easiest regimes for us to accelerate our growth. And so you could see us do more in India because there's just fewer barriers and there's more appetite. And so that India presents a very exciting market for us. And then I would say all of the rest of the new customers out there would be our third leg of growth, is that there's what we would like to do with our customers in that third bucket is to pick the ones that we see multiple opportunities with. We announced a master licensing agreement with Sekisui in Japan because they see dozens of opportunities to deploy plants at commercial scale across their islands because their feedstock is going to be municipal solid waste. They don't have landfills in Japan, they don't have land to waste, and so there's a nice marriage between what they want to do and what we can do. And so I think we're going to be strategic to take that total addressable market and say, okay, how can we move the fastest and the most profitably as we go forward? And that's how we're viewing our landscape.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
My question was on feedstocks. I think we've talked about flue gases and biogas and agricultural waste. If this carbon to value market takes off in the long term, where are we going to get all the carbon from?
Multiple sources. So, I mean, the good thing is once you understand how the complexity of the entire value chain works on the upstream and the downstream side, you can navigate through it. So for us, we are agnostic to the feedstocks on the hydrogen and the CO2 source. For hydrogen, we can use PEM electrolyzers, alkaline electrolyzers, high temperature co-electrolyzers. But for, let's say, the next years to come, there are electrolyzers capacities already on the ground, and we are now focusing on alkaline electrolyzers that produce chlorine, and they produce hydrogen as a byproduct. And if you really look at the landscape, you might see how much hydrogen is actually vented. So it's terrific. So or it's not terrific, it's insane. So we talk about building up electrolyzer capacities, and on the same hand, people start venting the hydrogen because they don't know what to do with it. So that's the one feedstock, and certainly also CO2 is the other feedstock. I mean, there's a huge debate about it. Are we having enough CO2 for making all the fuels? So if that would be the case, I would have 20 children, because then we know that we are safe on that side. But obviously there is enough CO2 available. Again, you need to find the spaces, be it industrial point sources that will decline hopefully over the next 20, 30 years. We can also go to biogenic sources, biogas plants, direct air captures is certainly one thing to look at. But again, coming here back to the modular technology, you have a solution which fits to the value chain now. So, and securing then attractive sites, attractive offtake contracts for the feedstock is absolutely key to develop more and more projects in your pipeline.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think that's all the time we have for questions. It was great to hear from you all. Thank you, everyone, for joining the panel. It's good to talk to you all.